Pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because your financial future depends on you ignoring distractions and focusing on this absolute truth. Close all other browser tabs and pay attention, because this is not just another video of empty speculation, cheap conspiracy theory, or financial clickbait designed to steal your time. What you are about to discover is the anatomy of a collapse that has already begun, a silent geological and market fracture that is swallowing the foundations of our industrial system. The mainstream media is blindly focused on narratives of fleeting inflation and illusory interest rate cuts, while an unprecedented evaporation of physical liquidity occurs behind the scenes of the global market. They refuse to report this because the truth would reveal the lethal fragility of the banking system that sustains the illusion of normalcy that we experience today. The definitive trigger event occurred silently starting in 2021 and has crystallized irreversibly in recent months. According to data systematically omitted by mainstream financial journalism, but confirmed by reports from the Silver Institute, the global silver market has entered an extremely severe and relentless structural supply deficit. We are systematically consuming between 140 and 200 million ounces annually, more than the planet can effectively mine. This is not a simple seasonal fluctuation in commodity prices, but rather a systemic mathematical trap that has already been triggered. The relentless devouring of the photovoltaic sector, driven by new solar technologies, is aggressively draining all the silver available on the Earth's surface. When the atomic raw material that sustains our technological civilization physically runs out, the collapse of the debt-based fiduciary financial system accelerates towards an inevitable and painful structural implosion. The bleeding has reached the official coffers, exposing the true fragility of this institutional pyramid. While news anchors smile as they report record highs on traditional stock exchanges, large institutional investors are silently demanding physical delivery and withdrawing the real metal from the vaults of COMEX and LBMA in London. They know that a death spiral has been triggered and that the paper will be worthless once panic fully sets in. The current distortion is one of extreme and undeniable stress, with the gold and silver ratio operating absurdly above 80-1. Ignoring the real geology where the extraction ratio is only 8-1. What financial authorities are trying to hide from you at all costs is that the head-on collision between the real world and the financial illusion of Wall Street is already producing victims and destroying fortunes. To understand the gravity of this systemic trap, you need to swallow the red pill and look behind the dirty scenes of the derivatives market. The gear that has irreversibly broken is the reverse mortgage mechanism, or rehypothecation, operated by the big banks on Wall Street. The current price of silver that you see on brokerage screens is a fiction, an illusion dictated entirely by the paper market. They have created a structure where hundreds of derivative contracts can legally and simultaneously represent exactly the same single ounce of physical silver stored in a dusty vault. It's like selling a single gallon of water to hundreds of thirsty people in a desert, with the false promise that everyone will be able to drink at the same time. As long as investors accept cash settlement, this death spiral continues to silently spin. However, physical reality does not forgive accounting tricks, and it is precisely here that the central plumbing of the financial system begins to clog and burst. Industrial giants of our century, such as Samsung, Tesla, or global solar panel manufacturers, cannot manufacture their high-tech products using paper-printed silver futures contracts. The 21st century industrial revolution, encompassing the electrification of artificial intelligence and 5G networks, demands the real, tangible, and irreplaceable atomic metal. When cutting-edge industry begins to demand the immediate physical delivery of silver in a global market operating under severe fractional reserves and liquidity delusions, An incompressible and lethal bottleneck is created. It is mathematically and physically impossible to print silver on central bank printers to cover paper contracts falsified by the financial system. This unhealthy dynamic reveals the absolute illusion of security that the public has been conditioned to believe for decades by the corporate media. The system is pricing silver as if it were a simple, elastic financial asset, but global industry desperately needs it as an essential and irreplaceable industrial raw material. Think of this scenario as a gigantic row of dominoes about to fall uncontrollably. The first domino falls when industry realizes that the coffers are empty and demands possession of the real asset. When factories cannot obtain the metal to keep their assembly lines running, physical panic instantly sets in. The security perceived by the traditional market is false, a smokescreen sustained only by blind trust in a fiduciary settlement system that operates dangerously leveraged and without the necessary physical backing. It is crucial to understand that the artificial suppression of prices cannot last forever when the geological physical fundamentals scream in the opposite direction. The Wall Street financial machine depends entirely on you, the investor, blindly trusting the numbers flashing green and red on the screens of electronic trading platforms. They need you to accept inflated paper money instead of the physical delivery of your wealth. However, as the energy transition devours colossal and increasing amounts of available atomic silver, the disconnect between the tangible world and the derivatives charade becomes unsustainable. This implosion is not a mere remote possibility. It is a structural mathematical certainty already in absolute inertial motion. The collapse of physical liquidity is the black hole that will swallow the price manipulation operated by the major global investment banks. When liquidity evaporation reaches its irreversible tipping point, we will witness the catastrophic failure of the delivery mechanisms of the major global commodity exchanges. The rules of the game will be changed overnight by the system's gatekeepers, using obscure force majeure clauses to protect the very financial institutions that created this disaster. They will forcibly liquidate paper silver contracts in devalued fiat currencies, leaving unsuspecting investors with notes of no real purchasing power, while true industrial wealth disappears into the hands of the corporate elite. It is a brutal and silent transfer of wealth operated in broad daylight under the guise of natural market volatility. The average citizen, who believed the reassuring narratives of the suited experts in the mainstream media, will be summarily crushed by this brutal, legalized, and systemic expropriation mechanism. Therefore, the red pill you need to swallow now is accepting that the modern precious metals market is the largest fractional reserve scheme in human history. Paper silver is a volatile and false shadow that attempts to mimic and hide the true critical and strategic value of an increasingly scarce atomic element in nature. We are witnessing the controlled demolition of physical supply, masked by a derivatives bubble poised to detonate the heart of our global technological matrix. The systemic trap was meticulously designed to keep the masses doped with paper assets while the true basis of productive wealth is plundered. Understanding this lethal fractional pricing mechanism is the only intellectual defense mechanism that separates the strategic investor from the inevitable victim of this rapidly approaching structural financial collapse. To understand the impending catastrophe, you must look back, for financial history not only rhymes, it repeats its cycles of destruction with millimeter precision. What we are experiencing today is an amplified mirror of the 1970s, an irrefutable pattern of fiduciary ruin that the mainstream media deliberately sweeps under the rug. In August 1971, the Nixon shock severed the umbilical cord between the dollar and gold, ending the Bretton Woods Agreement and throwing the world into an inflationary death spiral. The authorities of the time staged the exact same theater that central banks are staging now. First, the absolute denial of chronic inflation, followed by flimsy excuses, and finally, draconian emergency measures. The vital signs of collapse were identical, and those who believed the official government narratives at that time simply lost everything overnight. In that dark decade, while confidence in fiat currencies melted like ice in fire, gold soared to protect purchasing power, accumulating impressive gains. However, the real wealth explosion, the phenomenon that insiders captured, happened with silver, which far outperformed the yellow metal. Silver operated like a taut slingshot, firing violently in the final third of that systemic crisis cycle. This occurred because silver suffered from a perfect storm identical to today's. Absolute monetary panic coupled with an explosion of incompressible real industrial demand. In the 70s, the driving force was photography and the electrical matrix. Today, it is the green revolution and artificial intelligence. The evaporation of liquidity crushed the unwary, proving that when industry and fear compete for the same scarce asset, the physical price suffers an upward implosion. This pattern of institutional blindness also dictated the rules before the 1929 cataclysm and the 2008 meltdown. In all these historical fractures, the financial elites and the press anesthetized the public with promises of a plateau of permanent prosperity, concealing the gangrene that devoured the foundations of the economy. They maintained the illusion of normalcy running in the gears of the system until the exact second the exit doors are locked. The current systemic trap, with paper contracts outperforming physical silver, is the reincarnation of the toxic subprime mortgage derivatives that decimated families in 2008. The lethal difference is that now the suppressed asset is not an overvalued house, but the fundamental chemical element for the future of human civilization. Whoever ignores the ironclad mathematics of these historical precedents chooses to be voluntarily the main victim of the next financial massacre. Your fear in the face of global economic instability is not paranoia. It is the purest intuition of an intelligent individual perceiving the cracks in a broken system. History unequivocally proves that bankrupt governments always sacrifice the population's savings to try to stem the bleeding of their own unpayable debts. Mathematics is cold, brutal, and does not negotiate with narratives of hope or empty political promises disseminated in the evening news. The disconnect between the historical ratio of silver and its geological reality is the most glaring and lucrative anomaly of this century, an error in the financial matrix about to be brutally corrected. Just as in past crises, the window of opportunity to anticipate mass panic is closing rapidly. When the herd realizes that paper money has lost its function, physical silver will have already disappeared from the reach of the average citizen. I'm writing Block 4. Traditional media has conditioned you to blindly believe that at the last minute, the central bank or the government will intervene to save the economy with billion-dollar bailout packages. This is the most dangerous lie you can accept today, because the institutional trap they themselves created has no magic escape valve. Our monetary authorities are trapped between a rock and a hard place, operating a zombie financial system that has completely exhausted its analytical ammunition. The financial engineering that masked the structural fractures of the past has failed miserably in the face of the undeniable physical deficit of an atomic raw material. They cannot print silver on computer keyboards to deliver to desperate industries, and any attempt to intervene in this physical market will only accelerate the evaporation of liquidity. The state, once the great guarantor of stability, has become the main architect of its own imminent implosion. If the Federal Reserve and global central banks decide to bail out brokerages and large banks exposed to the derivatives meltdown, they will have to commit absolute monetary suicide. To bridge the gigantic gap between paper contracts and the non-existent metal, the only tool the system knows is the massive and uncontrolled printing of trillions in fiat currency. Injecting this tsunami of fake liquidity into an already fragile economy will not solve the silver shortage in the solar technology industries, but will trigger rampant and corrosive inflation. We will be facing a classic death spiral, where the attempt to save the paper market farce will immediately destroy the purchasing power of the world's population. The institutional remedy offered by technocrats will become the lethal poison that will silently and mercilessly annihilate the savings of the average worker. On the other hand, if the authorities stand idly by and allow the law of the market to operate, the structural carnage will be equally devastating for the unsuspecting citizen. Without the makeup of a state bailout, commodity exchanges will declare technical bankruptcy, triggering obscure force majeure clauses to forcibly liquidate spot contracts in devalued currency. In this scenario of controlled implosion, global supply chains will suffer a fulminant heart attack, paralyzing the production of electric vehicles, solar panels, and cyber infrastructure. It is a perfect systemic trap where physical scarcity strangles the backbone of our modern civilization, causing mass layoffs and industrial blackouts. The plumbing is irreversibly clogged, and the trillion-dollar corporations that depend on the metal will discover that the Wall Street house of cards has definitively collapsed on their own high-tech factories. When the financial and governmental elites realize that control has slipped through their fingers, the instinctive reaction of the broken system will be to brutally imprison the capital of the average individual. To prevent capital flight and bank runs on tangible assets, extreme and dictatorial capital control measures will be imposed under the false pretense of national security. The government will not hesitate to confiscate pension funds, freeze bank accounts, and restrict international financial transactions, closing the slaughterhouse doors while inflation devours your assets. The illusion that the state protects the citizen will evaporate the moment the elite needs to protect its own assets and shift the bill for the catastrophe onto civil society. The traditional banking system will transform into an insurmountable cage, proving that dependence on centralized institutions is the greatest risk anyone can take today. You must coldly accept that the physical liquidity collapse of silver is an event of tectonic proportions that no government decree or political agreement will be able to reverse. We are witnessing the apocalyptic clash between the tangible world and the uninterrupted delirium of irresponsible speculation that has dominated the last 5 decades of our turbulent modern economic history. No one will come to your rescue when the smokescreen dissipates and the true gravity of the atomic scarcity is revealed to the rest of the panicked herd. The responsibility for surviving this institutional carnage rests exclusively on the shoulders of the strategic individual who has the courage to see beyond the headlines fabricated by the bought corporate media. In this game of financial survival, understanding the moral and mathematical bankruptcy of institutions is the fundamental step before we move on to executing immediate asymmetric protection tactics. The time has come to transform your absolutely justified fear into ruthless tactical power against the broken system. The first asymmetrical, non-negotiable defensive move is the immediate acquisition of physical silver, focusing purely on sovereign currencies and generic, low-premium bars. Forget index funds, digital receipts, and futures contracts that will evaporate the moment the stock exchanges and brokerages structurally implode. You need to hold the atomic metal in your own hands. the real and irreplaceable asset that the high-tech industry desperately needs to survive. When the obscure force majeure clauses are triggered by the financial elite to liquidate paper money, your tangible silver will not suffer any liquidity evaporation or default. You will become your own bank amidst the absolute chaos of the global fiat death spiral. The second indispensable asymmetrical move consists of radical defensive positioning through completely segregated custody outside the traditional banking system. It's pointless to buy the right asset if you leave it stored within the systemic trap that is about to collapse on our heads. The intelligent observer, who understands the gravity of this collapse, should store their physical assets in private vaults, in secure jurisdictions, or in strictly personal and anonymous custody. This strategic counterflow move eliminates 100% of the counterparty risk that will destroy the masses hypnotized by the mainstream media. If your brokerage firm declares bankruptcy tomorrow morning, or if the government freezes current accounts in an act of authoritarian desperation, your physical wealth will remain intact, silent, and completely unreachable by the confiscatory clause of the failed state. The third and most aggressive move is an attack focused on exploiting the historical reversal of the gold-to-silver ratio. The master strategy is not to sell your gold because it's bad, but rather to convert it because the market prices this reserve as safe and extremely expensive. By exchanging an inflated asset for brutally suppressed silver, taking advantage of an unreal distortion of over 80-to-1, you build natural and safe financial leverage. When physical scarcity forces the broken system to normalize this ratio to historical standards of 40-to-1, your real equity in ounces will simply double automatically. This is the perfect asymmetry that the media hides. Your downside risk is absolutely shielded by voracious global industrial demand, while the upside potential is driven by an inevitable stranglehold. The perfect storm we've just uncovered isn't an isolated event that ends when you close this video, but the beginning of a controlled and continuous demolition of the global financial system. Traditional media will continue to systematically lie to you, masking corrosive inflation and hiding the brutal evaporation of physical silver liquidity, while elites flee with real assets. To survive this fiat death spiral, you can't rely on the numbing narratives of corporate journalism. You need an uninterrupted source of tactical intelligence, a radar that tracks this geological fracture in real time. Therefore, your only logical move now is to subscribe to this channel immediately and activate all emergency notifications. We will be your advanced sentinel against the systemic trap that is crumbling our current technological world. Being correctly positioned before mass panic demands relentless discipline and exclusive access to data that the financial matrix tries to suppress at all costs. We are building a shielded community of strategic individuals who refuse to be devoured by the institutional implosion orchestrated by the major central banks. The derivatives market's plumbing has already become irreversibly clogged, and the countdown to the final strangulation of the green tech industry is running against you at this very millisecond. Following our weekly updates is no longer a mere choice of digital entertainment, but a mandatory survival protocol to protect your family's wealth. Join our trench of independent financial intelligence, because when the paper market dominoes start to publicly collapse, there will be no more time to search for the undeniable hidden truth. Now that you've swallowed the red pill and grasped the terrifying magnitude of the structural flaw separating paper silver from irreplaceable physical metal, I need to test your readiness. The chasm between the intelligent individual and the broken system has never been as evident and dangerous as in the current scenario of absolute monetary collapse. I want to descend into the comments of this video to debate directly with those who have already awakened to the harsh reality of the atomic scarcity that will devour the illusion of Wall Street. Silent knowledge is useless if it is not accompanied by an aggressive tactical positioning in the tangible world. True wealth is about to violently change hands, and our discussion space will be the command center for mapping escape routes against this fiduciary dictatorship masquerading as a structured free market. Answer frankly and directly in the comments below. What percentage of your current assets are still trapped within the systemic trap of traditional banks, vulnerable to liquidity evaporation? Have you already begun converting your digital illusion into real physical silver, protected beyond the reach of the state's clutches, or do you still secretly trust that the government will save your savings when the death spiral engulfs the derivatives market? I want to know exactly what your psychological barrier is to embracing tangible financial sovereignty and abandoning the false security of electronic receipts issued by failed institutions. Write your detailed strategy in the comments right now, because your practical account could be the catalyst of urgency needed for another observer to awaken before the inevitable closure of global escape routes. Carefully read the responses from other members of our community, discuss the best paths to segregated custody, and strengthen your arsenal of knowledge against the censorship of traditional media. We will continue to tirelessly monitor the daily bleeding of COMEX coffers and the destructive veracity of the photovoltaic sector, bringing the pure and crystal-clear facts directly to your screen. Don't forget to share this urgent confidential dossier with the few people in your circle who possess the intellectual capacity to withstand the overwhelming weight of structural economic truth. The illusion of normality has an expired expiration date, and the timer of industrial implosion does not forgive the willful ignorance of the blind masses. Maintain your surgical focus on protecting your tangible assets. Prepare for the inevitable shock, and we will meet in the next critical update of this Sentinel.